No. The vote is 8-3. The proposal is rejected.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to this breakdown of season 2 of The Last of Us, episode 3, titled The Path, an episode that I believe sets the path forward for what we can expect to see for the rest of the season, which is this journey with Ellie and Dina and our characters after the Joel incident, after being attacked, and how will these characters move forward. And I think this episode really showed us that this show is obviously going to be following Ellie and her emotions and her journey. Is it going to be a journey of revenge and vengeance, or is she going to come to forgive Abby at some point? Well, only time will tell. But this episode really did a good job of setting the foundation of when you remove such a big character, a pivotal character like Joel, you have to fill those shoes, and not just with one character, but with several characters. And we saw that in tonight's episode, and we'll talk about that, whether it's a Dina, whether that's a Gail or a Tommy or a Jesse, all these supporting characters that's going to have to fill in that void. So we're going to get our first scene of this episode really sets the mood for this episode. I think this was, one thing about television shows, especially on this scope and scale, whether it's a Game of Thrones or a Succession or anything that HBO has given us for the past, I don't know how many years at this point, a lot of shows don't take the time to let your audience and your characters breathe, to sit in the moments of grief. And this was a moment in an episode, and particularly in this moment here that's on the screen now, really sets the tone for allowing us as an audience to have a breath, to sit in these characters' emotions. And this is beautifully displayed in this opening scene with Tommy. Not having played the second game and knowing very little about the game, I know one of the big changes from last week into this week, Tommy was in that room when Joel was murdered. Now, obviously, that sets a whole different storyline for that character. But knowing that Tommy was removed from the room and obviously Dina was in the room, that changes the dynamic of this story. And to have this moment of this brother grieving and saying goodbye to his brother with the watch and wiping his blood and almost having this solo, wake for his brother really lets you know that this show is not about let's rush past these emotions. Let's rush, let's get these big moments, let's get to the action. No, we're going to sit with these emotions. We're going to sit with these characters, and we're going to learn to feel what they're feeling in these moments. And I really do appreciate a scene like this. And it makes me very intrigued to know, as we'll talk about later, knowing a little bit of what Tommy does in the game in part 2. Like, he's on this Rambo vengeance path, and who knows, something might happen where he gets that bloodthirst, so that he wants to seek that revenge. But as of right now, he is, coming at it from a different angle. He's not as headstrong or as aggressive as Ellie. So it's really interesting to see Tommy moving forward. But again, beautiful scene. It's a moment for the character to grieve, but it's also a moment for the audience to grieve. And throughout this episode, so I really appreciate that the show took its time to let us sit in these emotions, took its time to let us, grieve a loss of such a pivotal character. And this scene did that beautifully, in my opinion. We have this scene here of Ellie waking up in the hospital, and she's still in that room. She's still in that room where Joel died. That was the last thing she remembered. And it's such an interesting way to put us in the character's shoes. She has what I assume is a collapsed lung or a broken rib. But this moment here, again, sit in the moment. Appreciate the moment, grieving with these characters, and her waking up, and it shows us that she's still in that room mentally. Obviously, physically, we know she's not in the room, but mentally, she's still there.
I can give you something.
This is something that's going to stick with her for the rest of her life. Regardless of what happens with her and Abby, that moment of Joel seeing him die and the way that he died will always be, something that she's going to remember. And that is just haunting, right? That's just haunting to think of, to be already in this apocalyptic world, and knowing that these characters not only sit with their fear of what's around the corner, are they going to make it to the next day, but then having these emotions when you lose someone as close as Joel as was to Ellie. So again, I thought early on this episode really did a good job of letting us know where these characters are and not rushing past these emotions, not jumping to the next chapter. It was just really great for this show to let us experience these feelings with these characters early on, and I thought they did a good job of doing that. We get a bit of a time jump, but we're still in these emotions. So we find out we're 3 months later. Ellie's been in the hospital for 3 months, but Jackson's rebuilding. This is a literal rebuild from the town, but this is also a metaphorical allegory of the characters rebuilding themselves, right? Mentally, physically, not moving past what happened, but trying to accept what happened, trying to live with what happened. So again, I love how this idea of rebuilding the town is felt throughout this episode of the characters rebuilding themselves to get back to either their old selves or a new version of themselves or a combination of both. So I love that idea of like physically seeing this town trying to rebuild their lives, trying to cope with the loss of the town, the integrity of the town, their loss, their loved ones, what have you. So it's a really good way to kind of illustrate that very early on. Again, this episode, the path, not to beat a dead horse, but this is the path that these characters will have to move on moving forward. Is it going to be a path of vengeance, a path of wrath, a path of hate, or is it somewhere in between? Can you find that level of moving forward and level of acceptance, right? So I think this was an episode that sure, a lot of people might not remember on a scale of like, oh, this was the episode where blah, blah, blah did this, or, you know, they killed this many infected or whatever. But this, I think this episode you got to think about when you look at the overall story of this season and like, this was the episode that kind of hit the reset button, the episode that kind of reset the characters, grounded the characters in a sense of like, okay, from here on out, this is a different version of the character, or sets them on this path of where we're going to see them at the end of the season. But I think this episode kind of gave us a hint of what this show looks like without Joel character. Someone like Gail is a character that's going to have I think a bigger role in this overall story. And if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me correctly, Gail is a brand new character from the show, right? She's not a character from the video games. Like this is an original character that they built from the show for the show's purposes of telling this story that from the video game, but with some alterations. And I think, number one, Catherine, phenomenal actress, but this character so far is very interesting because there's a level of self-awareness. She's very aware of her interactions with these characters, like an Ellie. Like she, later on in the episode, she calls her on her BS, you know, liar and lying. She does a little bit of both. She's a liar, as she says to Tommy later in this episode. But I like that she can see through the BS, but she also knows there's a time and a place to address someone like Ellie, who's just recovering after her injuries, but also recovering after Joel. She's playing the part of like someone that's there to listen. That's her job, right? As a therapist of the town. But she knows when and where to have her battles, right? She lets Ellie essentially lie to her in her face. I'm fine. I'll deal with certain things. I'll learn to move past. Like she's saying the right words that a therapist would like to hear to let them know that their client is okay. That's what Ellie's doing.
I'll have to let myself off the hook for that.
Well, you really are doing good.
I think Ellie thinks that she thinks she's getting over on Gail because that's something that Ellie normally does. She's able to kind of talk her way through certain situations and make people believe certain emotions. But Gail is very smart. She can see through Ellie. Sometimes you got to listen. Sometimes you know your friends or your family is in a bad spot, but sometimes you got to let them sit in those spots. Sometimes you got to let people go through their journey. You know, we've seen Joel's house from the outside, right? Episode 1. We never went to the inside. And again, I might be getting too deep into it, but again, it's like this idea of these exteriors of these characters, right? The exterior of the hardened, sometimes cold and calculated version of Joel, but now we get to go into the inside of his house, right? And get that personal sense of the loss. And something that this episode really did a good job at as well as there was so many close-ups, right? You felt like you were in the shoes of the characters. Again, sitting in their emotions, sitting in their grief. It shows this path that Ellie can go on, right? There's the peace, the time, the watch, right? The little symbolism of the watch and how much time has passed, and she can have time to take in these emotions and maybe move forward in a different way. But then there's the gun, and that represents the violence, that represents the wrath, that represents the hate, that represents the vengeance, the revenge that she has. And I think she takes the watch, if I'm not mistaken, but she also takes the gun. Which puts her, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but that sets her on this path. She can't let what happened to him go.
Ellie?
When you lose a Joel, you need your role players, right? When you have a all-star or a superstar Hall of Fame that retires, in this case, that being Joel, you still have a superstar in Ellie. need to, I'm using a sports analogy here. You need to build your team around, your star player. And we got coming off the bench a Gail. We got a Jesse earlier on in the episode and throughout this episode who I like very much, like the character. You have a Tommy, you have a Marie, and you have a Dina. She's doing a hell of a job of a character that shows compassion, a character that has wit, a character that has a level of intrigue, a level of charm. And I really like the dynamic between Bella and Isabel. It was a question I asked during the watch party. And it's a question I'm going to ask you all that's watching this breakdown. In this scene, Dina and Ellie are talking about the 3 months that she's been gone, the recovery that she's, been through. She's got some cookies for her. As we find out in the scene when she was recovering, if she knew anything, if she knew where these people came from, backstory, names, this, that, and the other, and she didn't. But she really did. And the reason she didn't do that, which is a good thing on her part as a friend, she didn't want her to take out the tubes and just immediately go on the road. And she's not fully healthy. So definitely a smart move on her part. But the question I have for you all, as she proceeds to tell Ellie, they're from Seattle, Owen, Abby, whole nine, right? Nora, she tells them the whole crew. Should she have done that? Is that the right move? Of course, you could think of it as, she wants her revenge too. She's a good friend. She's telling her this information and giving her the choice to either pursue her vengeance or to at least know, right? Or is that something you take to the grave? Knowing how Ellie is so headstrong, so driven, for better or for worse. As a friend, is it better to keep that to your grave and prevent more death? Attack them, they come back to attack you. And it's just this ongoing cycle of violence and loss. Let me know in the comments. If you were Dina, do you tell Ellie what she told her and proceed to go with her to Seattle to get revenge? Or do you keep that to your grave to help your friend keep their life, but also prevent other loss and chaos and bloodshed on both sides? What do you do? Let me know in the comments. As spoken of last week, and also a little bit in the watch party and a little bit in this breakdown, the change from Tommy being in the room in the video game and him not being in the room in the show. And from what I understand from the video game, mild spoilers from the video game, and that might come to fruition in the live action show, but who knows? But from what I come to understand is, since Tommy was in that room, that set him on a path of like bloodthirst. From what I understand in the game, Tommy is like straight up killing folks left and right. Who's to say that might not happen in the show, but it's obviously going to be from a different angle because he wasn't in the room. And from this scene that we have here now, it seems like Tommy is very apprehensive about the root of violence. He has a family to take care of, and he also knows his brother was on a certain path that he doesn't want to go down, but more importantly, he doesn't want Ellie to go down. But right now, he seems to be very much on the path of, we need to save lives versus taking lives. We need to preserve our resources rather than using them and potentially losing more people. It'll be interesting to see how they're going to handle the difference, if this is ever going to happen, if Tommy will be that angry, vengeful, revenge-driven character like he is in a video game versus what we're seeing in the show. I don't know if they set a name. I don't know what their symbol means, but they seem to be a group of nice people. I don't even know if that's the proper word to use. I mean, this is a world of survival. I'm sure these people had to do what they had to do to survive, but they seem to have a path of peace, right? They're kind of on their own, but there's also this level of like a cultish way about them. And I say that because all of them have scars on their face. Even the little girl has scars on her face, almost like a way of accepting them into this society or this ideology that they follow, whatever it is. But we know that this world is split up in all these different factions. So I don't know what the name of this group may be. Either way, they seem to have a level of peace, but if they're pushed to survive, they have their weapons, the hammers, so on and so forth. They talk about a prophet, and the prophet passed away 10 years ago, and the belief is that their essence and their beliefs still carry on, like their legacy. So this is interesting. I'm assuming there's more to come about this group. I don't think this is the last of them. I think they might just be separated potentially. I don't know, maybe they wiped them all out, as we find out later in this episode. But there is something that they fear as they're on this path. We hear that there's a whistle, and they take cover, and we'll later find out what happens to them. But a moment that we have to talk about is the vote. And there was some good points to be made. There's a young lady that mentions, I I care for Joel. We care for Joel. We lost someone of our own, but we can't use our resources to inflict, fight violence with violence. Another gentleman says it's about forget and forgive. We have to move on. It's just the world that we're in. We can't allow this consume us and to lose more people. Two good points. But then, surprise, surprise, Seth, who we know from episode 1, had his inappropriate comments towards the kiss that Dina and Ellie shared. And since then, he's apologized. And this episode, he's continued that apology to her, right? Or he tells the crew, like, no, forget this kumbaya crap. We need to show force. We need to lay it in them. If we don't, they can come back and laugh at us because they're going to think we're weak. They can think we're just going to roll over. You can just come to our town, kill our people, and get away with it. That's not how we're going to live. This is not the way of the new world, right? This is not how we survive. Again, a little rough around the edges, especially coming from him. But then Ellie has her moment. My only critique, the words had weight to them. I understand where she was coming from, but I do wish that she didn't have the paper. I wish she would have memorized it. I don't know. To me, it just would have came off a little bit more authentic, and it at least got 3 people moved. We get the vote. It's 8-3. I'm confident in saying that the 3 votes that said yes to go on and take the 16 best people of their crew and to go to Seattle, I'm to assume it was Marie, Jesse, and Tommy. But it might not, maybe Tommy said no. Maybe Jesse said no. Maybe Marie said no, right? And there was the 3 yeses from other people of the committee. Well, I don't know if we'll ever find out who said yes, who said no, but nonetheless, the majority won. Let me know in the comments, y'all. Whose side were you on? Obviously, as an audience, we want to go on the war. We want to go on the journey. We want to see at least what vengeance looks like. But if you were in this position, if you were in the committee, whose proposition, whose pitch won you over? Was it the people that made the point that you don't want to lose more people, you don't want to waste your resources? Or do you side with Seth and Ellie that we need to fight, we need to get justice for the people we lost? Let me know in the comments below. But a scene that, again, just shows us that Tommy isn't as gung-ho as I thought he was going to be on this level of getting revenge for his brother. But we have this conversation between him and Gail about him not wanting Ellie to go down this path of vengeance, very similar to his brother, because unfortunately, as we know, while it didn't happen immediately, but eventually Joel's sins caught up to him. It was obviously what happened with Abby. He doesn't want Ellie to go down that similar path. That, sure, she might kill Abby tomorrow, 6 months from now, a year from now, but eventually killing Abby might catch up to her. So I like this conversation. Again, this is where Gail tells him that she was very aware that Ellie was lying about how she was interacting with her at the beginning of the episode in the hospital, but also that she was kind of using the more softer approach in her speech to the committee as it was just an angle. And it wasn't truly how she felt. This is the signs of a good show, that you don't have to focus. Every scene doesn't have to have our main character, which is, in this case, Ellie. We can have these quieter moments between supporting characters like a Tommy, like a Gail. Build a good show. In order to do that, you have to have these characters that we care about. You have to spend time with these characters. They have to have their own storyline. It doesn't always have to be always surrounded by our lead characters. So, and she also comes prepared. Someone mentioned earlier in the chat, the 3 months that Ellie was recovering, Dina's been sitting in her emotions too. Like, we found out very early on this season that Dina and Joel had their own relationship, a friendship that developed between the two. So she wants revenge too. So she's been preparing for the last 3 months as well. And she has the map all set out that she's been studying and getting ready for this very moment. So again, I like Dina. I like Dina a lot, man. She balances out Ellie. Speaking of slow burns and potentially payoffs and characters that I didn't really think I would care for after their first introduction, and that's Seth. A good show allows these characters to be morally ambiguous, right? They play in a gray area. They're not just good characters or bad. Well, there's bad people in the world. We know that. But this show likes to take the time to show the complexities of these characters. There's layers to characters that people can change, right? That's a big theme of this show, right? And we see that with this Seth character. Week 1, he said what he said to Ellie and Dina. He apologized episode 2, and he continues to apologize here by showing, he helped them out with the horse. He got them the gun. He's letting them out. He's going to cover them. He has other people that sides with them, and he supports their cause. So again, this is a great example of, you meet a character, we meet an Abby, we meet a Seth, and we think of them as, POS, and they might be that, but there's more to it. Again, if I'm thinking about Game of Thrones, Jaime Lannister. Y'all remember when we first met Jaime banging his sister in the castle and then pushing Bronn out of the window? And as time went by, I'll just speak for myself. He was one of my favorite characters by the end of the show. I hated the way he went out, as well as Cersei, but nonetheless, we came to really love that character, him and Brienne's relationship, and you find out that there's more to the character than just a macho, a knightsman that Jaime Lannister was. He had a heart, right? You just had to find it through all the ego that he had. But nonetheless, I bring that up to bring up Seth, right? There's more to him than just the bigotry and the comments he made. There's a guy there that maybe has his own pain, his own experiences, and wants to change. Again, I think that's a thing that not only the show adapts, but a thing that we as human beings in life have to accept, is that you might do something bad one day, but it doesn't make you a terrible person for the rest of your life. You can change, right? So I'm liking what they're doing with all of the characters, but specifically Seth. It just goes to show that this show isn't just concerned about playing in just black and white. They're playing in the morally gray. There's complexities, there's layers, there's different dynamics with different people. So I like that. But the show is still, they're playing a long game here, man. They didn't do the kiss. They didn't hook up that night. There's a moment that's revealed in this scene that might point towards pregnancy. And that is, Ellie learns that our good old boy, Jesse, and our good old homie, Dina, have come back to each other for the last 3 months. They found their way back together, even though they said they weren't, but they, on again, off again relationship. Again, this isn't a game thing that I know of. I'm just taking from what the show gave us. I think Dina's pregnant. I'm going to give my evidence in a second, but I think she is pregnant. As we kind of wrap up the episode, Dina and Ellie making their way to Seattle. They come across the group that we met earlier in the episode, and they are dead. They are dead. It seems to be that they have been wiped out with no hesitation. Men, women, and children. But again, going back to what I mentioned a couple minutes ago about is Dina pregnant? I mean, sure, you just came across people getting annihilated. There's, you just saw a dead child, and I would assume their bodies were there for a few days, and there's a stench to it. So it's probably not the most pleasant sight to come across. But Dina throws up, and she says, "I don't normally do this." She's probably seen her fair share of dead bodies throughout the apocalypse. But my reasonings of, is she pregnant, morning sickness, hooking up with Jesse the last few months, this is interesting. And if she is pregnant, that's when you rope in Jesse, follows them, finds them. That's when you rope in Tommy, has to go with them for backup, and how you get those characters in the mix. And if she is pregnant, what does that mean for Ellie and Dina's relationship? And does that set up I'm thinking even further down the line, does something happen to Jesse trying to defend his his girlfriend, and his child to be, soon to be child? Very interesting. Again, I'm not just pulling this out of a hat. I think there's some evidence there that might show that Dina might be pregnant, y'all. There's also too a level of like when I think I might just be making this up in my mind, but when she saw that child, I think that affected her, because if she is pregnant, if she knows she's pregnant, I mean, she's going to have her own child, and she doesn't want to, it's the fear of like, do I bring a child into this world because of what can happen to children in this world? There's no prejudice. The kids can die. in this world, not just at the hands of the affected, but of human beings. They find in Seattle, they finally made it, and they're under the assumption, oh, okay, I thought we might have had more. There might have been more obstacles to overcome, which I think there are going to, based on the trailer, there's going to be many, many more things to come for these two, but they're outside the parameters. And, you know, we have Manny, he's taking inventory, and in the episode, on a note, again, Ellie and Dina are under the impression like, oh, the wolves, ain't no wolf pack here. This is gonna be light work. But we see they have tanks and trucks and weapons and military weapons and ammo. They are very prepared nonetheless. So this is whatever the plan is for Ellie and Dina, they're gonna need help. But either way, before we wrap up this breakdown and continue our live discussion, for those watching the edited version of this video, what'd you think of the episode? You know, your pros, your cons, your thoughts, your theories. If you played the game, please refrain from sharing spoilers. But if you did play the game, just kind of let me know how you're feeling about how the show's, if it's following the script or if it's taking some creative liberties. And if you like those creative liberties, let me know in the comments. And if you're like me watching a show as a show is presented, let me know what you all are thinking. The Dina of it all, the Jesse of it all, the baby, the group, both groups that we were presenting in this episode. Gail, Tommy, you know, the whole crew back at Jackson. Let me know what you thought of the episode. Which score would you give it? And let's talk about it in the comments. Again, thank you for watching the edited version. Hopefully you can join us next week. We have a live watch party followed by a live after show. So hopefully you can join me next week. But besides that, like, share, comment, and consider subscribing to the channel. And I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.